Welcome to Traore's Stand, the unfiltered truth about Africa's new frontier. The world woke up this morning to a tectonic shift in the Sahel that the mainstream media is too afraid to report. Ibrahim Traoré has not just taken the chairmanship of the Alliance of Sahel States, he has effectively consolidated a new superpower in the heart of Africa. This is the moment the three nations of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger stopped being separate entries on a map and became a single, unbreakable fist. We are witnessing the birth of a unified command that makes the old colonial borders look like nothing more than dust on a windshield. What if the strategic maps held by the Pentagon were rendered obsolete overnight by a young captain who refuses to take orders from anyone but his own people? Could the formalization of Traoré's leadership over the AES be the final spark that ignites a global rejection of the US dollar's dominance over African resources? This is why every person sitting in the United States needs to pay attention right now, because the price of your gas and the stability of your pension are tied to the gold and uranium that Traoré is currently locking away from the Western elites. For too long, the children of the African diaspora have watched from afar as their ancestral lands were treated like a playground for foreign instructors and corporate scavengers. They told us that Africa was a continent of victims. But how can you call a people victims when they are currently building a digital and military fortress that the North cannot penetrate? Before we dive into the tactical maps and the secret files, ask yourself, is it justice when a nation is sanctioned simply for wanting to protect its own children from foreign-funded chaos? This is the emotional heartbeat of a revolution that is finally speaking in a language the world cannot ignore. This is no longer a small-scale insurgency. It is a direct confrontation between the old guard of the global empire and a new generation of sovereign lions. This conflict is about more than just territory. It is about who owns the future of the global South. But why is Washington reacting with such quiet panic? And what does this mean for the survival of the greenback in the coming months? We are going to peel back the layers of this high-stakes game in the next few minutes. If your heart beats for freedom and you want to see Africa stand on its own 2 feet, hit that like button and subscribe. Join the movement for the truth by sharing this video with one person who still believes the old lies. If you stand with the sovereignty of nations and the dignity of the Sahel, leave a comment below saying Africa rise to show the world that we are watching and we are united. To understand why the Western elites are losing sleep tonight, you have to look past the headlines and see the tactical reality on the ground in the Sahel. For decades, the architects of foreign intervention relied on one simple trick to keep Africa under their thumb: isolation. They made sure that Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger acted like separate rooms in a house with no hallways, keeping their armies small and their borders porous for the wrong people. But Ibrahim Traoré has just built a steel skin over this entire region. By unifying the military command of the AES, he has essentially told the world that an attack on one is an attack on all. Think about a man named Musa, a 45-year-old father who has spent his entire life farming a small patch of dry earth near the border of Niger and Burkina Faso. For years, Musa lived in a state of permanent injustice. He watched as insurgent groups would raid his village, steal his livestock, and then simply vanish across a line on a map that he wasn't allowed to cross. The colonial borders were a sanctuary for the killers and a prison for the victims. Musa's story isn't just about poverty. It is about the calculated abandonment of African people by a system that preferred red tape over human lives. But the 2026 Niamey Declaration has changed everything for men like Musa. Today, that invisible line in the sand is gone. Under Traoré's leadership, the elite rapid intervention brigades are no longer stopped by the ghosts of colonial cartographers. If a threat is detected in northern Burkina Faso, the response doesn't wait for weeks of diplomatic clearances. A single headquarters in the heart of the Sahel now moves 200,000 combat-hardened troops like a single, crushing blow. This is the strategic nightmare for the foreign instructors in the South who used to hide in these legal gray zones to bleed our nations. We are watching the final dismantling of the 1885 Berlin Conference. For those who don't know their history, that was the moment European powers sat in a room in Germany and drew lines across a map of Africa they had never even walked upon. They designed these borders to be silos, compartments intended to keep African nations weak and eternally dependent on Western security umbrellas. They wanted us to be small so they could stay big. But on this historic day, Ibrahim Traoré and his brothers have shattered those silos once and for all, proving that the geography of the Sahel belongs to the people. The unified command is more than just a military pact. It is a declaration of maturity for a continent that has finally found its own voice. In the past, the West provided our armies with just enough equipment to fight, but never enough to win. They gave us old maps and outdated rifles while they kept the satellite intelligence for themselves. They wanted a perpetual war that would justify their presence and their control over our minerals. But the AES has flipped the script. We are now pulling our own resources, our own air power, and our own special forces into a formidable alliance. Imagine a massive chessboard where the pieces have suddenly started moving on their own. That is the reality for the Pentagon and the French intelligence services right now. They assumed that under pressure, the alliance would fracture. They thought Mali would look west, Niger would look east, and Burkina Faso would be left alone in the middle. They were wrong. By targeting our shared infrastructure, the foreign handlers have only succeeded in accelerating our integration. Every attempt to sabotage our sovereignty has only added another layer of steel to our skin, making us more resilient and more united than ever. There is a growing movement of the African diaspora, successful doctors, engineers, and intellectuals living in the heart of Paris and Washington, who are finally looking back home with pride. They see Ibrahim Traoré as a symbol of the new Africa, a leader who doesn't go to Europe to beg for aid but stays in the Sahel to build power. These are people who understand the value of a sovereign currency and the danger of the US dollar's stranglehold on African growth. They know that when the Sahel stands tall, the entire global South feels a little bit more independent and a little bit more powerful. But there is a high price for this defiance, and the West is preparing to make us pay it through sanctions and blockades. They want to create a state of permanent chaos to force us back to the negotiating table. They want to see the AES fail so they can tell the rest of the world that African self-governance is an impossible dream. But how can they win against a soldier who sees no difference between the flag of Burkina Faso and the flag of Niger? You cannot defeat an army that has decided that death is preferable to a life of perpetual servitude under a foreign master. The strategic map of West Africa has been redrawn in the language of power. The red lines of the past have been replaced by a wall of resolve that stretches from the Atlantic to the Sahara. We are no longer the underdeveloped students of Western military academies. We are the masters of our own destiny and the guardians of our own borders. The era of the proxy war is over because there are no longer any gaps left to exploit. The three fingers of the Sahel have finally closed into a fist, and that fist is ready to protect the future of every African child. If you can see the truth through the fog of mainstream media lies, then you know that this is a turning point for the entire world. The old empire is crumbling, and a new frontier of sovereignty is rising in its place. We must stay vigilant and keep documenting these victories because the hunters have finally become the hunted. The Sahel is no longer a theater for the wars of others. It is a home for the brave. We are building a fortress of dignity that will stand for generations to come, and the world is finally starting to listen. The silent war for the skies over the Sahel has entered a lethal new dimension that the Western mainstream media is desperately trying to ignore. While the world was distracted by conflicts in Europe, Ibrahim Traoré was busy building what we now call the Russian shield. This is not just about having more boots on the ground or better rifles. It is about the invisible battle for the electromagnetic spectrum. In the modern age, if you do not control your signals, you do not control your country. For years, foreign specialists hiding in the gray zones of neighboring countries like Benin have been teaching insurgent groups how to use high-tech drones to bleed our infrastructure. They were fighting a war of signals, using first-person view-strike drones and artificial intelligence-guided surveillance to strike our villages with surgical precision. But as of 2026, the Alliance of Sahel States has deployed a technological wall that has turned those very signals into a trap for the hunters. Think about a woman named Fatou, a 50-year-old schoolteacher in a small village near the northern frontier of Burkina Faso. For months, the sound of a buzzing drone meant only one thing: impending destruction. She lived in a world where the sky was no longer a source of rain, but a source of fear. The injustice of it all was staggering. How could a peaceful village be targeted by technology that costs more than the entire village earns in a decade? This is the high-tech cruelty that the old colonial powers exported to our land. But recently, Fatou noticed something strange. The drones would come, but they would suddenly wobble, lose their way, and crash harmlessly into the red dust before they could ever reach their target. That is the Russian shield in action. It is the invisible hand of sovereign defense that has restored the peace to Fatou's sky. This technological shift is the result of a direct and sovereign partnership between the AES and the Africa Corps. These are not mercenaries. They are the architects of a digital fortress, unlike the old security assistance from the West, which only gave us enough to survive but never enough to win. This partnership is about the transfer of modern, high-intensity capability. We are seeing the deployment of signal jamming domes around our critical water dams and oil pipelines. We are seeing satellite intelligence that can pinpoint a foreign training camp with the precision of a few meters. For the first time, the Sahel has technical parity with the North. We have moved from the era of old maps and outdated rifles to the era of electronic warfare and satellite dominance. To understand the scale of this shift, you have to look at the strategic map of the continent. Imagine a series of digital bubbles rising over the major cities and strategic corridors of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. These bubbles represent zones of electronic blindness for our enemies. When a foreign-trained drone operator in a hidden camp tries to launch an attack, they find that their link to the machine is severed the moment they cross into our territory. They are flying blind into a trap. This has created a massive crisis for the architects of foreign intervention in Washington and Paris. Their entire strategy relied on the ability to use proxies to destabilize our nations from a distance without ever having to risk their own soldiers. But when the drones stop working, the proxies are left exposed and alone on a battlefield they no longer understand. The reaction from the global powers has been one of stunned silence followed by frantic repositioning. In Washington, there is a growing realization that the old playbook of divide and rule has met its match in the era of unite and secure. The Pentagon is watching their influence evaporate as Traore consolidates this unified electronic front. In Paris, the frustration is even more palpable. They have lost their grip on the signals and the resources that once fueled their economy. Meanwhile, Moscow and Beijing are watching with a different kind of interest. They see a new model of African sovereignty that doesn't rely on Western approval. This is a massive geopolitical veil of cards, and Ibrahim Traoré is the one holding the deck. But let us be clear about the stakes. This is not just a game of technology, it is a question of justice. Is it right for a foreign power to use the skies of another nation as a testing ground for their latest weapons? Is it justice for the people of the Sahel to live in constant fear while their gold and uranium are shipped off to light up the cities of the North? The Russian shield is the answer to those questions. It is the physical manifestation of a people saying no more. We are no longer the students of Western military academies who are told what we can and cannot do. We are the masters of our own signals and the guardians of our own borders. This operation, which some are calling a digital revolution, is proving that the hunter has finally become the hunted. The foreign instructors who thought they could operate with impunity in the gray zones are now finding that the ground beneath their feet is no longer safe. They are learning a hard lesson in the reality of 2026. You cannot win a war of technology against a people who possess the ultimate weapon: the truth. You can fund the insurgents, and you can buy the silence of the mainstream media. But you cannot buy the heart of a soldier who knows he is fighting for the very ground his ancestors walked upon. The Unified Command has effectively created a borderless military space where intelligence is shared in real time across 3 nations. When a signal is detected, the order is processed through a single headquarters and executed by the closest available unit, regardless of which flag they wear on their shoulder. This level of integration is something the colonial architects never thought possible. They built this region to be fragmented and weak, but we have turned their silos into a fortress. The psychological impact on the foreign-backed proxies has been devastating. They used to hide behind the legal technicalities of colonial borders, but today they find that those borders have become a prison. As the sun sets over the Sahel, the signals are clear. The era of African proxies is coming to an end. We are witnessing the rise of a new world where sovereignty is not a gift given by the West, but a right seized by the people. The technical superiority of the AES is not just a military victory, it is a moral one. It is the proof that when we stand together, we can overcome even the most sophisticated threats from the north. The Sahel is home, and for the first time in a century, the people who live here are the ones who decide who is allowed in the sky. Can Africa truly stand on its own without the help of Western instructors? The answer is being written in the electronic silence over the northern frontier tonight. We are moving toward a future where our resources stay in our hands and our security is built by our own people. If you believe that the rise of the Pan-African Legion and the Russian Shield is the start of a new era of freedom, then stay with us. The road is long, but the path is paved with clarity and resolve. The real reason for the hushed panic in the corridors of power in Washington and Paris isn't just about the military maneuvers we see on the ground. It is about the gold in our soil and the survival of the US dollar in the global markets. For decades, the global financial system has operated on a simple, unspoken rule. African resources must remain cheap, and they must be traded in a way that supports the currencies of the North. Ibrahim Traoré has just ripped up that rule book. By taking the leadership of the AES, he is moving toward a future where the wealth of the Sahel is no longer a subsidy for Western lifestyles. This is the economic storm that the mainstream media won't explain to you, but it is the one that will ultimately decide who wins this long-term struggle for sovereignty. If you are watching this from the United States, you might wonder why the internal politics of the Sahel should matter to your daily life. The truth is that your pension, the price of the gas you put in your car, and the stability of your bank account are all tied to the dominance of the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. When leaders like Traore decide to trade their gold or uranium on their own terms, or perhaps even in their own unified currency, they are pulling a strategic brick out of the wall that keeps the dollar standing. Every time a nation moves away from the Western financial orbit, the pressure on the American economy increases. This is the hidden price of the revolution in the Sahel that the elites are trying to keep off your radar. Consider the story of Amadou, a 52-year-old man who has worked in the small-scale gold mines of Burkina Faso for 3 decades. For most of his life, Amadou saw the gold leave his village in armored trucks, bound for refineries in Europe, while his community remained without clean water or reliable electricity. The injustice was as clear as the dust in the air. He was a man producing the world's most precious metal, yet he was living in forced poverty because the rules of the game were written by people thousands of miles away. Today, under the new mining codes and the AES Economic Alliance, Amadou is seeing the first signs of a shift. The wealth is finally being anchored to the land that produced it. This isn't just about one man. It is about a systematic reclaiming of dignity. Traore knows that military sovereignty is a hollow shell if the economy is still controlled by foreign central banks. This is why the formalization of the AES leadership is such a critical step. It signals the beginning of a unified economic front that can negotiate as a powerhouse rather than as 3 fragmented states. We are talking about a region that holds some of the world's most significant reserves of gold, lithium, and uranium. When these 3 nations stand together, they are no longer underdeveloped petitioners. They are the owners of the resources that the modern high-tech world desperately needs to function. We are also seeing the powerful influence of the African diaspora, the doctors, economists, and strategic thinkers living in the West who are tired of seeing their home continent treated as a charity case. These are men and women over the age of 40 who have achieved success in the heart of the empire but have never lost their connection to the Sahel. They are now providing the intellectual and financial fuel for this revolution. They are the ones explaining to the world that Africa doesn't need aid. It needs the freedom to trade on its own terms. They are the bridge between the struggle on the ground and the global shift toward a multipolar world where the West is no longer the sole arbiter of value. The price of failure for the Western elites in this scenario is staggering. If they lose control over the Sahel's resources, the cost of everything from nuclear energy to jewelry will rise in the north. But more importantly, the psychological blow to the global order would be irreversible. If a young captain in a camouflage uniform can successfully challenge the financial hegemony of the dollar and the euro, what is to stop the rest of the global south from doing the same? This is why the sanctions and the media blackouts are so intense. They are trying to starve the revolution before it can become a blueprint for the entire continent. They want to make an example out of the AES to discourage anyone else from dreaming of independence. The struggle for the Sahel is essentially a question of who has the right to live in comfort. Is it just that the citizens of the North enjoy cheap energy and stable investments while people like Amadou work in the heat for pennies? The AES has decided that the answer is no. This is the emotional injustice that drives the policy of Ibrahim Traoré. He isn't just fighting for territory. He is fighting for the right of every African to have a bank account that isn't at the mercy of a foreign capital. The map of the future isn't being drawn in ink. It is being forged in the gold and lithium that will now stay in Africa to build African schools, African hospitals, and African power grids. The foreign handlers currently retreating from the region are learning that you cannot win an economic war against a people who have nothing left to lose and everything to gain. They can threaten us with blockades, but we have the sun, we have the soil, and we have the resolve of millions. The era of the resource curse is being replaced by the era of the resource shield. As we move toward a more integrated AES economy, the signals are becoming undeniable. The dollar's grip is slipping, and the fist of the Sahel is tightening around its own future. The world is changing, and for the first time in a century, the change is starting here, in the heart of the motherland. If you believe that every nation has the right to its own wealth and that the era of economic colonialism must end, then you are part of this story. We are not just watching history, we are making it by refusing to accept the old lies. The rise of the AES is the rise of a new standard of justice that the world has ignored for too long. Stay steady, because the storm is just beginning, and the foundation of the old empire is starting to crack. The Sahel is home, and we are finally the ones who own the keys to the vault. The formalization of Ibrahim Traoré's leadership over the Alliance of Sahel States marks more than just a change in title. It marks the irreversible end of a century of African vulnerability. What we have witnessed today is the transition from a collection of fragmented states into a fortress Sahel. We have proven that when the people decide to be free, no amount of foreign technology, no secret bases in the south, and no instructors from the frozen north can stop the momentum of a continent that has finally found its own voice and its own fist. The era of being the underdeveloped students of Western military academies is over. Today, the Pan-African Legion stands as a warning to anyone who still dreams of the Berlin Conference. But as the shadows lengthen over the desert tonight, a new question arises that the West is not prepared to answer. If the Sahel has successfully built a shield against the drones and the dollars of the old empire, which African nation will be the next to realize that the chains were always an illusion? The red lines on the map have been replaced by a wall of resolve, and the world is watching to see who will be the first to blink. To the puppet regimes that still host foreign bases, look at the map tonight. Your protectors are already looking for their exit strategies, just as they did in Kabul and Niamey. When they leave, you will be left standing alone before a population that remembers who stood with them and who stood against them. The fist is closed. The Sahel is home. We have secured our gold, our water, and through this unified command, we have secured our future. If your heart beats for Africa's freedom and you believe in the dignity of every sovereign nation, I invite you to join us in a moment of solidarity. Say amen in the comments below if you believe in a free Africa. If you stand with the pioneers of the Sahel, subscribe and stand with us. We build with facts, not fury, as we follow the path of those who refuse to be victims of history.